Okay. Welcome back to the Open Up podcast, everyone, and to episode 51 with the founder of the social and mental health movement, Heart on My Sleeve, Mitch Wallis. Thank you, brother.
Hey gang, good to be here.
And did you want to enlighten everyone on your skin tone at the moment?
Yes, I think that's a really important thing to start with. That I don't usually look like this fucking reindeer. I got fried at the beach today, so excuse my complexion. And I'm also swigging a carton of almond milk. So you just
Unsweetened.
know, yeah, I'm Sweden, bro. So I'm a huge weirdo sipping on almond milk, being sunburnt. But that's kind of what you get with this package, unfortunately.
So the first question I usually lead with is, can you describe yourself for us as a man and as a human?
It's a good question, very profound. Um, I can describe it tactically, but I would, at the 10,000 foot view, what I hope people would describe me
Yep.
as well as what I would describe myself as, is authentic. Realness is my number one value. So, and it's intentionally a neutral value. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. And I think that is a metaphor for a lot of mental health, that like we're trying to always be something as opposed to just being. And it's taken me a long time to lean into realness. And when I have, it's been the most liberating and freeing thing ever, and has quite literally transformed my life in every domain. Outside of that, I would like to see myself as a problem solver, a pasta enthusiast, a a seeker of connection, and a luster, if that's a word, a luster of meaning. So, I mean, I'm tenacious, annoying, and passionate would be closely followed by authentic. When I get something in my mind, I just run at it. I'm somewhat obsessive, diagnosably so. I live for mental health and well-being and helping people come home to themselves and realize the transformational power of their own mind. I have a background in business, so I worked for Microsoft for 7 years, which I'm sure we'll get into. So that's kind of like my hammer and screwdriver. That is my toolkit in which I use to drive impact in my passion area. So if that's my skill set, my passion area is mental health. I bring business and mental health together. Yeah, very close with family, very close with friends. I'm a certified yoga teacher. I'm a DJ. I used to run marathons. I box a bit. I'm really into fashion and design. Yeah, there's a lot of shit going on. I got a sleeve. It's all happening.
That's awesome, man. I guess we'll dive right on in, seeing as your struggle starts from childhood, if you want to walk us through that.
Yeah. I don't know who your traditional guests are, but I think as well a lot of my profile is quite public, and so I'm going to keep this semi-brief, just because if people want to unpack it more, they can do so on a number of channels.
Yep, and I'll put the links to that in the show notes in the bio on Facebook and stuff.
Yeah, cool. And by the way, thanks, Lachlan, for having me on this. Really, really happy to be here.
My pleasure, man.
So for me, I was always burdened by the thought of like who I was, like who am I, was a very distress-provoking question, because I never really knew, and the tension between my inner and outer worlds was like enormous. So
even as a kid.
Even as a kid, yeah. So my outside world was very normal, and we'll get into what the hell normal is.
Yeah.
But I was actually born and raised on a farm, despite my very hipster appearance now. I started as a salt of the earth country boy. My mum was a horse riding instructor. And so until the age of 5, I grew up sitting on horse bins, chewing their ears, putting chickens into places they shouldn't be, all the rest of it. And my mum was very young. She had me at 23, and my parents divorced when I was 2. So it was kind of her and I on the farm for a bit. And to this day, she's, my best friend and one of the reasons why I'm still here. But and just an incredibly important character in my narrative. But as time went on, we moved into the city. My mum met my stepfather. We were fortunate enough to live in Balmoral, which is one of the most affluent suburbs in Sydney. And the reason why I say that is part of what I do now comes from a position of privilege. I am privileged in both my socioeconomic status, but also my ability to live with mental health and function. So I think those two things bring a duty and a responsibility to serve.
That's beautiful that you're self-aware enough to identify, and not only identify it, but sort of say that out loud. Most people wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, man, I've always felt it started with a guilt of like, am I even allowed to not feel good considering I have everything you could want? And then that guilt transformed into maybe a propensity to serve, but it comes back to this refusal of pain without meaning. Like if there's pain without meaning, it's enough to drive me insane. So I think making meaning from pain is only exaggerated and accelerated when sitting on a platform of privilege already.
Yeah.
Like that guilt and that want is even heightened. Normal teenage years. I mean, going out with girls and hanging out with the cool kids. I was pretty good at sport. But more so in school, I managed to navigate well through school. So I kind of kept out of trouble. I was smart enough to get around. But I guess the overarching theme there was incredibly normal on the outside yet again. Okay. After high school, I graduated and started a degree in commerce at Sydney Uni. And from there, I shortly after got accepted to Microsoft as, I think, the youngest intern in the company, which is pretty cool. I worked my way up there, got a graduate role at Microsoft, and then worked my way up again and did a bunch of work in the marketing team in Australia. Got promoted over to Seattle when I'm almost 29 now. That would have been when I was 25, and was working out of the global head office there as a product marketing manager worldwide. So on Surface, which is their laptop division. And so that was a very awesome time because Microsoft, this huge juggernaut, the biggest company in the world, having this almost startup within inside itself, because it's been a software company for forever, and it's like we need to get into hardware. And so my job was kind of helping to build that brand out, and a lot of what I did was trying to compete against Apple to drive premium perception of what we're doing. And so I would be flying to Milan, hosting parties with Vogue, and flying to Hollywood and having one-on-one meetings with Robert Downey Jr. on some of these upcoming products that we had to carry on planes in gun cases because they were so sensitive to the stock price. And I was driving a Porsche, flying business class all around the world. It really was a pinch yourself type of life. And I paint that picture not to try and be boastful at all, because a lot of that was luck and was gifted to me. But to try and show the immense contrast between what was happening on the inside that whole time. So when I was 7, I started to realize that I was different. Even before that, I was probably feeling it around the age of 5, but people started to notice around the age of 7. And I remember sitting outside Woolworths in my mum's car, and I was repetitively touching the dashboard of her car, blinking over and over, saying the word God, and obviously very peculiar behavior. Yeah. And she looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I don't know, but I always just feel guilty and upset and horrible. And I think that I'm a bad person." And she's like, "Okay, that's a lot. So let's go to the doctor."
That's a lot as a kid.
Yeah. And I don't mean like I kind of believed it. I meant like I don't sleep at night because I was convinced that I was a bad person and was consistently feeling just terrible about myself. Um, uh, at the doctor, they're like, it looks like Mitch has early onset of anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time, other than there's something wrong with you and you're broken. Something needs to be hidden from the world. And so, but it was the first time I was like, whoa, something's going on here. Shortly after that happened, I was so afraid of what that could mean that I was sick or, so I kind of did everything that I could to force it down. And I got really good at hiding it and masking it. But unfortunately, the volcano started to kind of tremor outwards and started to spill from the sides. Throughout my teenage years, I started to experience panic attacks, really bad anxiety, a whole different mutation of OCD, and some depersonalization and a bunch of other stuff. And it was horrible. It really was horrible. And I would come in and out of periods of it. And so I wouldn't necessarily stop and look at it in the face because A, I was too scared to, and B, whenever I tried to do that, particularly in a professional setting, I never felt safe. I never felt like they caught me. I call it the dreaded left eyebrow raise, where you kind of sit down with someone, you're absolutely shitting your dacks about telling these people, these godlike creatures of psychologists, what you feel, and you're just waiting to be whacked by this stick, and they kind of just go, oh, and that tiny moment where they're confused or feel scared, and I'm like, wow. And so I'm looking at this person who's ingesting my story, doing so in a way that feels completely foreign and frightening and all these things. And so it would re-solidify all of the fears that I would have. And so in my mind, I'm like, fuck, the safety net that's supposed to catch me, I'm afraid of, and it's afraid of me, which isn't necessarily true, but it was the belief system I had, a way around that I would attach to things in my life. And so that was incredibly frightening. It was.
Could you ever be? Could you ever be yourself? Were you okay to fit in with people, or did you have to create?
Yeah. No, I mean, I could always be myself, and I suppose we're all acting to an extent, but it's that I didn't show the full self. It's not that it was it was that you saw this much. Because I didn't want to see the other part either. So, yeah, it wasn't necessarily an act so much as it was a coping technique.
Okay, yeah. I thought maybe you would have isolated yourself in that position, but that's awesome that you could, fit into circles being some sort of version of yourself.
Yeah, I think part of why I am able to have a somewhat normal functioning life today is because I have had figures around me, in the very few that I did confide in, most of which being my mum and to some degree my stepdad as well, would always provide me with a sense of strength. I have a lion tattooed on my arm here because it represents, and an elephant on the other side for masculine and feminine, and appreciating both energies. But I never took the easy way out. And so even when it was really hard to face the world or face myself, I would push myself. And I thank my lucky stars that from an early age, I realized that bad emotion doesn't mean run away. It probably means move toward and be willing to sit in the discomfort. Now, that's not a black and white sentence. And, when I run workshops, one of the biggest things I try and teach people is learn how to think in the gray. The gray is the salvation. Yep. And so what I don't mean by that is always feeling discomfort. It's not that black and white. What I mean by that is we sit on a spectrum. It's good to be at your edge. Be mindful not to go over the edge because then you might get injured. But not feeling great all the time isn't necessarily bad, so long as you're bringing that pain and grounding it into, I got this, I am enough, and I feel supported, because that's when the muscle's building.
Awesome. And is that what your mum helped instill in you?
Definitely.
That's super powerful, man. Not too many kids get that.
Yeah, and I don't know if she knew what she was doing. And there was always a part of me that needed more, because she'd never been through what I'd been through, and that's where I'll get to in my story, where things really started to shift when I felt that. But there was definitely an underlying principle of like, don't run away. And I would run sometimes, but as much as I could, I would try and come back. So when I got promoted over to the States is kind of when things started to really, really unravel. I think there's a number of things, work stress and all the usual shit, but mainly I think in your mid-20s, a lot of stuff bubbles to the surface for a lot of people. You know, you sort of have some key points in your life, particularly with mental health, one being kind of like 5 to 8, another being when you first become a teenager. And I think another being in your early to mid-20s, where you're like existentially, holy shit, I'm an adult. My biology is starting to settle down, but yet ironically aggravating at the same time for the parts that have been left over. I need to fend for myself. I need to make money. I need like all these things. And I think for me, so it was a natural function of that, but ironically also a natural function of I'm not living my purpose. And I don't know who I am, coming back to that first sentiment. And so I was kind of like, the Band-Aids were falling off way quicker than usual, and I was going downhill. And so in a desperate lunge for trying to just stay afloat, I'm like, I got to study psychology to get this thing sorted myself. So I applied to do my Master's of Clinical Psychology at Columbia University in New York, somehow got accepted, went to my manager. I'm just over in the States now for like not long. And I'm like, hey, I need to take annual leave to go and start a degree in psychology in New York for a while. She's like, okay. So I did, and I flew over, and I remember the first hour of the first class, I was sitting there and I was like, this is what I was putting it on the earth to do, without a doubt in my mind.
How do you, sorry, man,
yeah.
how do you, is that something that your mother taught you as well, to follow that gut instinct? Because a lot of people being in your position that you were over there, like seemingly living the good life, wouldn't follow their gut into something that would possibly take them away from something like that, even if it meant following their purpose?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So yes, but also I was trying to stay alive. And so it was more of just it was lack of options. It was lack of options where I physically thought the only way I'm going to get better is to educate myself, which is a horrible way to do it. And, you know, you should never think that you have to figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
But that's what I thought I had to do at the time. And it's proven to be an incredibly helpful thing now, but the principle or the mindset of I have to figure this out on my own is definitely a narrative that I've had to let go of in order to survive. So at this time I'm like, holy shit, this is what I want to do. But then also I can't go and help anyone because I'm such a fucking mess. And like, you know, there's all this shit going on. So that created like the perfect storm of this like explosion of a lifetime of mental health challenges that I hadn't got on top of, and a purpose-filled tension of like melting pot, and it all erupted. So shortly after that, I flew back to Seattle and the wheels fell off the cart, big time. And there's a lot of interesting things that happen when you're at rock bottom. And by rock bottom, I mean like beyond what I thought rock bottom was. But I think what happened when I was down there was, I guess I call it a miracle, but like miracle is such a shit word, and it implies that things get better straight away, because it absolutely doesn't. That never happens, in my opinion. But I was in my bedroom one night and I had nowhere else to turn to, so I picked up this computer and I stumbled across this guy's video on YouTube. And it was this guy's kind of like 26-year-old dude who was going through the exact same thing I was, and he was just in his bedroom, just like telling his story. And he's not someone famous; he's not a content creator, and it was almost word for word identical to mine. And it was the first time ever that I felt understood, and that someone had finally put words to things that I'd been experiencing my whole life, but never thought anyone else was. And I couldn't quite fathom how important it was to feel understood, to feel like another human being out there somewhere got it. Because it was
the first time since you experienced this in childhood that you felt understood.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a long time to feel alone, man.
26 years, yeah.
Jeez.
First time ever where I was like, wow. And I realized kind of in that moment and on reflection of that so much of the pain we feel isn't necessarily what we're going through. It's the story and the narrative of I'm not enough.
Yeah.
And that I'm not worthy and that I don't fit in. And that sometimes, quite often, does more damage than what we're actually going, like the anxiety itself. It's the stories and the narratives that go along with it and the feeling of isolation and loneliness. And so even though the whole broken bone didn't heal straight away, what it did was all the swelling went down and this whole second layer just evaporated by feeling seen by one dude that I'd never even met. Just an entire life shift. And it gave me, I hate the word hope because it implies that something's not here and one day it might be. But it gave me a sense of it's okay. It's like it's all going to be okay. If I can see someone who's so fucked up on paper be so normal and healthy in front of me, it's possible. And so I really got taken by how one person's vulnerability can truly change a life, and that yes, it is the starting point that allowed me to have the willpower to go and see 8 different therapists before I found the one that worked, as opposed to giving up after one that didn't because I thought that I was unhelpable, or and start the medication. And all these stories that I had in my mind I allowed to drop and or change for the first time, because he told me that my character could be more than what I had determined it to be. And so from that end, yes, it precipitated all those other things, but it was medicine in and of itself. Like, it physically reduced the symptoms and the swelling, even if it didn't cure it completely.
Yeah, 'cause that's real, authentic and genuine connection for the first
Correct.
time.
Which means, which is so fast forward, quit my job at Microsoft, left America, flew to Australia, moved in with my parents, blah, blah, blah. I really didn't have much left because the career had gone. And I was like, I got my story. And that guy showed me the impact of one person. So I went down to Balmoral Beach, drew a heart on my arm and told my story. And within a week, that video had reached over 1 million people. And within a month, a global movement started called Heart on My Sleeve, where people all around the world started tattooing hearts on their arms and telling their story and making meaning from their pain.
It's fucking amazing, man.
And now it's one of the fastest growing mental health organizations in Australia, and it really is changing lives all around the world. And I never saw that coming. I just hoped to God that one day I would be strong enough to tell my story, and that story help other people.
It is making a difference, man. It's making a big impact. It's making a lot of waves, especially in the corporate space at the moment. And I'm stoked there's someone like you doing that, man.
Thanks, bro.
Sorry, from your story, I just wanted to touch on, you say you were in Seattle when you go back to work from uni or college and the wheels fall off. What do you mean by that? Do you mean like career-wise or mentally as well?
Only mentally.
Okay.
It meant that everything I was experiencing was at a level that was completely unmanageable.
Wow. Okay.
Everything flared up to a whole new level that was not good.
in terms of like panic attacks? Or
Probably not something I want to go too much into detail on because it's kind of something that I feel like I've dealt with and the box is now on the shelf.
yeah,
But in terms of the things that were, everyone has unique symptoms and experiences and experiences mental health differently. My experience of it and the bad side of it was just blown out of proportion.
okay. Well,
Yeah.
it's amazing to see what you've done coming from that position, man.
Yeah.
Very inspiring.
Thank you.
I guess so. Moving on to like recovery and how you've sort of come back from that position. You spoke about the video that gave you that connection, made you feel like you weren't alone for the first time. You come back, you shared your story. I'm assuming you got a huge outpour of love from people. Was there anything else that you used at the time or you've used since to sort of deal with that and process that?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. For me, the catalyst of all well-being journeys starts with relating to someone who gets it. For me, it really is finding a story, an archetype, a person, anything that allows you to be like, I am enough. Now, from that catalyst of relating to someone comes embracing who you are, acting from that place and living authentically, and then letting go of previous narratives and storylines in your own head that were keeping you in that place. So it just so happens that what I just described spells real, R-E-A-L. So relate to someone who gets it, embrace who you are, act and live authentically from that place, and then let go of the old story and make way for something new. That for me is the 10,000-foot view of getting well. Now, in terms of one level down from that, I believe there's two core pillars that precipitate well-being or act as protective factors for resilience. Because in my opinion, good mental health isn't about stopping bad things from happening. It's about getting better at responding to things that occur.
Yeah.
So it's our response that we're training, not the elimination of bad stuff. And I believe that response can be conditioned, and this is through my academic research and my psychology degree and my lived experience, connection and coherence. And what I mean by that is the first pillar is cultivating our ability to form healthy, secure attachment with other people. That means our ability to be vulnerable with people, to feel soothed and allow soothing to happen to us, to know our boundaries, to not overextend or underextend to others, but essentially know how to relate to another human, whether it be a parent, a child, a sibling, a spouse, whatever. But feeling connection is, from every study I've ever seen, more of a factor than the actual traumatic events that might ensue themselves. So, for example, Professor Dan Harris from Harvard, who I'm interviewing on my podcast soon, has shown that in studies with like 30 kids at a Catholic school who all got sexually abused by priests, when they went through and actually observed where they were at as adults and mapped symptomology and intensive suffering, the difference between people who were kind of managing at a mild level of suffering post a highly traumatic event like that and people who were super duper duper sick, with like chronic dependency issues, disassociation, personality issues, wasn't the severity of the trauma. It was whether or not they had a secure attachment style, i.e., as a child and as an adult, the ability to form healthy relationships. That was the difference between the outcome of the way that things happened in their life. And so for me, it reinforced what I know through my own life and through other learnings from Dr. Dan Siegel, all the attachment work from Mary Ainsworth, etc., that connection and investing our ability to be vulnerable in relationships, feel safe in relationships, feel soothed in relationships, to provide support in relationships, super important resilience factor. Second thing is coherence. Coherence is I know who I am. I have patterns of behavior, patterns of thought, patterns of feelings that play out in my everyday life that contribute to certain levels of distress. There are themes in my life, thoughts, feelings. And if you're coherent, you have a strong sense of why that is, where they've come from. You're conscious of your insecurities, and you have done the work to face things in your life. You know how your past is affecting your present. You understand your limiting beliefs about your future. You have a good self-reflective capacity to identify where the weakness is, where the pain is, and you can move toward that. And so there is a strong sense of self. Now, the capacity to form healthy relationships mixed with the capacity to self-reflect and have a coherent sense of your own story, in my mind and from what I can see in the research, are the two biggest resilience or protective factors to become a better responder to things in life, to form good mental health. Now, out of all that falls tons of things we can use to bolster those two muscles, like mindfulness, like counseling, like medication, like exercise, all that stuff. But I think in society, particularly in Australia, we jump all the way down to this level here of the tactics, as opposed to laddering back all the way up to how do I relate to someone so that I can act and live authentically and let go of my story. And I do that through investing in my ability to connect with others and my ability to reflect on who I am and where I want to be and where my problems are. Then, in order to cultivate and get better at that, I meditate, I play football, I do all that stuff. So you maintain and you build a platform to do the work on the hard stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes heaps of sense. And I think I can give a good example of this because since my attempt, I've sort of worked on myself relentlessly for 2 to 3 years, doing meditation most days, everything you can think of, breath work, all that sort of stuff. Yet these issues keep arising and I still found it hard to deal with them. It wasn't until I finally had a breakdown and then realized, oh shit, I need to go back through what's caused this underlying belief that's making me feel this way. And I went back through it and it ended up being sexual abuse or being introduced to sex at a super young age, and that I'd buried that so much, but it inhibited my connection with women, so it made me seek only validation, and that made me a cheater, and then that made me feel like a fraud. Then I felt like I wasn't enough. It was just this constant cycle. But until I actually went back and worked through all of that, I couldn't really get to a point where I was comfortable dealing or responding in an appropriate way.
That, my friend, is an investment in coherence.
Yeah, and as soon as you were saying it, I was just like, yep, I totally get you.
Very good. And so I'm going to pull out a few things that are super healthy about what you just said.
Yeah.
The first is coherence isn't about going into your past and like mining for shit. It is about understanding how storylines, usually subconsciously, are playing out in our day-to-day, bringing them to light so that we can become aware of them first and foremost. And notice I didn't say to determine whether they're right or wrong and do anything with them at the start. It's purely to be aware of them.
Yep.
And then the third thing is to unpack that and understand it is the goal. Not to victimize, not to re-traumatize, not to roll around in it, not to anything like that, place blame, simply to feel it, process it, understand it, and then let go of it. That's coherence. And it sounds like in your journey, you found a great deal of meaning from understanding and being prepared to face the harsh realities of why is my present the way it is, and what in my life stories is playing out that I need to look at without doing all those counterproductive things. And so I congratulate you on your willingness. And I sit here with you as someone who is a peer and on your journey and on my own journey and a collective journey to wanting to find out and be at peace with who I am and who we are.
It's ridiculously hard work, but if you want to spend the rest of your life your authentic self, I genuinely believe you have to go through all the trauma you've been through.
Agreed.
Awesome, man. Look, I want to be respectful of your time, brother. Did you want to tell us what your heart on your sleeve or heart on my sleeve movement is?
Yeah,
What you're
sure.
doing with that?
Yeah, so it essentially started, as I said, as an accident, and it kind of became the social platform for people to tell and receive stories. Why stories? Because of all the reasons I just said. It is kind of the currency, it is the economy or the technology that brings connection and coherence together, and allows us to not feel alone and relate to someone, which starts the whole journey. So I'm like, cool, imagine creating the biggest container on the internet for that ability to happen, which is essentially the mission. Um, from there, a few things have naturally fallen out, including we invest in the social media platform as a pillar, which takes the form of a storytelling podcast where I get people to tell stories just like this.
And what's that called?
Real talk.
Awesome.
Real talk, and it's on all platforms. Ambassador-led campaigns, all activations that have to do with heroing stories. The second thing we do is we've created an educational pillar in the form of a curriculum that we've called Real Conversations. Real Conversations is our intellectual property that takes people through end-to-end 5 modules of how to find your voice and how to hold space for someone else's voice, and essentially create connection and coherence. And so I'm super excited for that to be launching in about 2 months. It'll be an online hub. And that also has taken the form of some face-to-face stuff, which is a 3-hour workshop that we run at corporates, that has so far KPMG, one of the biggest consulting firms in the country, have incubated our business, and it has grown this whole capability and capacity and is on selling it on to a bunch of corporates into Australia. And where I'm actually talking about 360, I've now just on Monday, Microsoft announced it, heart on my sleeve, and I will be their mental health vendor this year. So an amazing story to come back. Back into a company that I thought I was leaving forever, and not just, I mean, as a company, I mean, they were the end of my story. To now come back in a position of empowerment is a really, really, I'm very grateful for that.
But that is because you are really providing value, man. You're changing lives. That's why you're getting those opportunities.
Thank you. And we're trying to work out how we get, so the consumer or individual flavor of the learning pillar is currently e-learning, but we're trying to get a face-to-face version of that. So we might host some training events and some seminars and stuff. So don't know what that's going to look like. And then the third pillar is around peer support and community intervention. So building actual spaces for stories to be shared. So pillar 1 is around like inspiring people through telling stories. The second is about educating how to do that in the right way. And then the third pillar is holding space to do that at scale. And so on this digital hub, we've built something called Circles, which is essentially this awesome peer support service, and an accreditation program called Real Mates. And Real Mates, as you can see, I love the word real. Real Mates is for people who sort of want to go over and above and act as facilitators of these circles, and also in their local communities, and giving them the practical and experiential tools to be able to do that confidently. So the business is anchoring around those 3 work streams with an overall mission to make people feel like they're enough, and double the help-seeking rate in Australia from 30 to 60% in the next 5 years.
Wow, man. What a mission.
Yeah, it's a big one.
You've got a lot going on, but I'm sure you'll make it happen, man.
Thanks, man. No, I got an amazing team around me, and I feel like I trust in God and the universe to help me out as well. So it'll all be good.
Awesome. Okay. One last question that I stole off Tim Ferriss. If you had
Love Tim Ferriss. He's my man.
If you had the chance to put a message on a billboard that thousands of people would see every day, what would that message be?
You are enough.
Nice. That's the quickest answer I've ever had.
For sure, bro.
Okay, to wrap up, man, just want to acknowledge you for all that you're doing with Heart on My Sleeve, man. You're legit changing lives, making people's lives better, and you're doing it on such a profound level. Knowing what you've been through from childhood up until now, I'm real stoked to have the opportunity to meet someone like you and to share your story. So thank you.
Thanks, bro. Likewise, right back at you, and we'll have to get you on our podcast as well. And I'd also encourage anyone listening to this who wants to be involved in the journey to first easiest step is to follow us on Instagram or Facebook, Heart on My Sleeve. And then also we're about to relaunch the website, heartonmysleeve.org, in the coming months. So if you want to be part of the journey, jump on over.
Awesome. Thank you heaps, man. Have a good day, eh?
Thanks, bro.
Ciao.